So we left off with the Romans regaining control of their city-state. And it was at this point that the patricians who led the revolts decided that they were going to follow their rule number one, and they were not going to have all the power in the hands of one person as long as they can help it. And they replaced the monarchy with their own special form of republic. And I say special form of republic because it wasn't quite a republic yet. It was more like an oligarchy. And I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible because basically they abused their system, they abused the Constitution, whatever they had written, and they would just pretty much elect people in places of power that there wasn't even a position for half the time. So I'm going to keep it simple, and I probably will butcher some words here, but you'll know what I'm talking about. But anyways, what they did was they replaced the king with two magistrates that they elected annually for a term of 1 year. Okay, and these were called councils, and they restricted that election because they didn't want these people to become too powerful and easy corrupted, which is what happens in our Congress today. You see people can sit on Congress for 30 years and they're worthless after a while, and we're trying to get them to restrict the terms too, but of course they won't do it. Anyways, these consuls, they had the power to veto each other's actions also. So even though they would work together, sometimes they'd be against each other depending what people put them in office and what politicians they favored. Now, these consuls, they're the ones that held the power over foreign wars and affairs. They had no real power domestically. That was led, by the Curia. They controlled domestic situations. Now, the Senate could, in times of crisis, elect a dictator, so they would choose either another person or one of these magistrates to become a dictator, and that gave sole power of all the Roman domestic, foreign finances, armies in the power of this one person. They also changed their little assembly. They called it the Comitia Centuria, and it's basically the assemblies of centuries. Century had 100 people in it. The number one group would be the wealthiest people in Rome. The second 100 people would be the next wealthy. Third group would be the next wealthy, and so on. And there can be like 10 groups. While the lower groups would be more the plebeians that still had enough money to arm themselves and fight, so they were allowed to be in the assembly, but they were at the bottom because they weren't as wealthy as the top guys, right? So whenever they voted, you would start at the top group, and they would vote as a group, and all of them would say, okay, I'm voting for this. That's one vote. Then the next group would vote, and that's, let's say they voted for the same thing, that's 2 votes. Then the next group, 3 votes. Well, by the time they got down to like the 6th, 7th vote, all these wealthy people are making sure they're on the same side and making sure they're voting for the same thing, and so they would have 6, 7 votes. Well, if there's only 3 votes left where the lower plebeian classes would vote, it didn't matter if they all voted a different way because they'd be outnumbered now. So you see how they abused this system? The patricians abused it, and so this is what started and sparked the struggle of orders, because the plebeians figured out, hey, this ain't no republic. This is why I call it an oligarchy. It's still the wealthiest people are making the decisions here. So, and the patricians would further monopolize all the state offices and put their own people in charge. So the plebeians really stood up for themselves and realized we're going to have to do something about this. And that is what starts the struggle of orders. And remember the Etruscans just got kicked out about 509, and here it is at 494 when the struggle of orders really starts. That's what I'm doing in these videos. I am compartmentalizing every phase of the Romans' history into a simple form that is easy for us to understand and remember. So the 494 to 450 BC was the high point which the struggle took place. What happened was the plebes realized that the patricians needed them to fight to defend their land. The patricians may have been able to run the state without the plebeians, but they would not be able to defend it. And the plebes staged 5 military strikes, um, and they called this a secession. They held rallies, protests, they made demands, and above all, they established their own assembly to represent them. And the threats worked because the assembly survived, and in 471, the government of Rome officially recognized the state within a state, the plebeian assembly. And their assembly was called the Comitia Tributa. And they also elected 2 magistrates to lead them with annual terms to represent them in the political realm. And this is when I would now consider Rome to be a republic, because they actually had all classes of their citizens, of course not the women and the slaves, but representing themselves. Now this went on for like another century, but between 494 and 450, that was the really high points when the assembly was recognized. Over that century, the assembly even grew stronger. They eventually attained the power of veto, which means I forbid. Veto any measure put up by any magistrate. So they really did have some power. And they created the 12 tables, code of law to follow. And that was basically the struggle of orders. And this leads me to the Roman rule number 2. And I label it as you can't live with them and you can't live without them. Now the Romans were a little dumb on this one because it took them a while, and they fought a few wars because of this, but they realized they need the plebeians. They need them for the army, and they eventually gave citizenship to the Italians in the Italian peninsula, and then eventually to all people living within the Roman realm. So it took, they did understand it, and they would give in to these demands because they realized they needed it to carry on. So it's a rule that they did live by. Now, I try to pride myself on just giving actual events or facts as best I can, and I read the ancient texts and try to find out. This story comes from Livy and Dionysius, and they're both exaggerated and they both tell different stories, but the point of me putting it here is it's going to have a point if you just hold out, you listen at the end. But you can see this takes place right after the Romans. Again, they had to go through their struggle of orders, but for the next 3-4 years they had to defend Rome, the Etruscans who tried to get it back, and the commander here named Lars Persania, he was a famous general, and he rather liked the Romans, and he sent some envoys over and said, hey man, put Superbus back on the throne, and everything's cool. And the Romans said, heck no, their number one rule, we will not do that. So he came over to Italy, and he marched his army up against the consuls at the time. And to give you a reference here, here's the point in Italy, and in the inset, it's right at the bend where the Tiber Island is, and this is where the Romans met Lars. As the battle began, Roman right had actually started pushing the Etruscans back, but on the Roman center and the Roman left side were getting beat by the Etruscans. So what did the Roman right do when they saw the center and the left getting beat? The entire Roman army ran. And this is the most important fact I want to say here. It's legend. This is the stuff legends are built on. As they got to the bridge, a junior officer by the name of Furius Camillus, he came up to the bridge and he put a stand. They were actually stacking bodies, dead bodies, to hinder the Etruscans coming across. But as the rest of the Romans were running, he ordered them to destroy the bridge, because you absolutely couldn't have them get across the bridge. Why, he held them off pretty much single-handedly. And then, when the bridge was destroyed, he jumped in the river, swam back with his armor and all his weapons. He didn't lose one of them, back to the Roman side. So this is what the Romans build their pride on. Now, I don't want to get too crazy into stuff that really isn't factual and may not be true, but you got to understand, the early Roman history was written by magistrates in, chief offices, which namely was the Pontifex Maximus, which was the religious, office. And of course, this office was dominated by the patricians. But they believe most of these records were destroyed by the Gauls, around the 390 BC sack. So the first historians, such as like Quintus Fabius Pictor and Marcus Procorius Cato, they had served during the Second Carthage War, and they wrote using the religious records, which we call annuals, and these writers would be annalists. So the early annalists that wrote about Roman histories used these records, these annuals, and most of our information comes from Livy. Now, his contemporaries Diodorus and Dionysius, who were Greek, also used those Roman annuals. And you got to understand, these early annuals, they had a sense of Roman destiny, and they wanted to show the Greeks that Roman was just as great as the Greeks were. But anyways, Livy's books, he had 142 books, and a lot of them have been lost and destroyed. And so later writers and annualists used Livy's works, but they had to fill in the gaps. And they would try to find the best information they could from either contemporary sources when they lived, or either stories being passed down from the fathers, stuff like that. They did the best they could. But Livy's history of ancient Rome is probably the best or authoritative accounts we have. Now, Livy was no soldier, and he did not understand military tactics and organization, so he is probably going along with these stories, which may be hard to believe. So he embellished them probably, and this and that. But the reason I bring this up, the fact is that the Romans made legends out of Camillus to put pride and hope into the Roman people, get them united, more militaristic, and give the young people something to strive for and want to be like. So that's the reason I bring up Camillus. Camillus was one of the first myth and legends, but you'll see that not only do you need that, but you really do need effective administration, effective military tactics, and practical use of them. Now, back to the military task of the Republic. They're trying to survive, and a lot of the accounts may be accurate, they may not. So I'm just going to run down some of their battles here. I'm not going to go into detail. We're just going to make this quick. After the Romans beat back the Etruscans, they were at odds with their Latium neighbors. Mainly Alba Longa and Lavinia, these Latin cities, and Rome, they all attempted to dominate each other in this area. And then the Latin cities had formed an alliance, and they called it the Latin League, against Rome. Now, there was a battle that took place at Lake Riglius, and this is a shot from up at the Mont Albans here. As you look down, of course the lake has been drained years, centuries ago. But this would be the area of the battle, and it took place here. Now remember, in the beginning I was talking about battles were going to be fought mainly on the plains, and this is in the Latium plain. See the mountains way off in the distance. Rome actually appointed a dictator, Posthumous Albus, to be in charge at this time of the crisis. And Rome, in some annuals it'll say he won a major victory, but at the very least they won some sort of victory, or at least a draw against the Latin League, because either way it showed that Rome was able to stand up against a coalition of other cities against them. So it was a good victory. And what I thought would be cool also is to keep a running battle record of Rome's most biggest decisive open field battles throughout their history. Not the minor ones, not skirmishes, but their main pitched battles or main campaigns. And we'll keep a running record and see how they do. This one at Lake Riglius by Posthumous Albus I consider to be their first one, because it again they were able to fight off several other cities, and then the cities after the Latin League wanted to join them. So this happened about 494, 493, so this would be their first victory. And after 493, the Romans and the Latins entered into a defensive pact, and Rome was on an equal footing with all Latium now. New threats against Latium came from the Apennine Mountains. These came from the tribes of the Volsci and the Aequi, who repeatedly invaded Latium. And now, again, most of our accounts are coming from Livy, which probably aren't real reliable, so I'm just going to go down list the important battles again. I only cover important battles in my entire history here, just important main ones, and I'm just going to cover these real quick. So a Roman army was supposedly defeated at the Algidus Pass, which leads into Latium from Tusculum. So they lost that battle. Then Rome appointed a new dictator, Quintus Cincinnatus, and he won a major victory over the Aequi. Now, the Volsci, under a Roman renegade general, Coriolanus, was in control of much of southern Latium. Okay, he gained control of that whole area. Now remember, this has taken time over a period of probably 30 years. And in the meantime, at 460 BC, supposedly the Sabines, or the Sabines, however you want to pronounce it, they took Rome. Now, it took 11 years according to the records, but they were probably fighting the Sabines quite a bit. But eventually, they did win a victory. And in a major victory, the Romans defeated them. And eventually, the Sabines were accepted as Roman citizens, and the gens Claudian, he was a famous hero in this battle. That family evolved to become a major Roman elite family in history. Then from 449, that battle took place where the Romans had to defend their city once again. Then we go to 431 BC, and in Algidus Pass again, Posthumous Albus met the Aequi here, and this time he had defeated them. Now remember, I want to try to keep this simple as possible. So we're going to recap real quick. We're in section 2, the Republic of Rome. And we're in chapter 2, the first military tasks of the Republic. And remember, this takes place from 493 BC down to about 390 BC. And their backs were up against the wall as soon as they took over their city back from the Etruscans. They've been fighting the Volsci, the Aequi, the Sabines, the Etruscans. So they've been doing pretty well. And we've covered so far in this chapter 2 about 60 years, because we're at 431 BC. And the battle record so far for the Romans is 4-1, which is a great record so far. But a new man comes along, the second founder, and this starts our chapter 3 under section 2. Now, the most obvious reason why they were winning was because their neighbors fought just like they did. They all used the phalanx system, and there was no great military innovations going on at the time. Now, the Romans, the history calls this early Roman army, the Servian army. It was based after a king, Servius Tullius, who organized it, and he based his army. His smallest unit was a century, and this was more of a administrative rather than a tactical unit or idea, because it was more based on political and economics rather than military organization. Because remember how Rome was set up. The wealthy families who could afford the better equipment, they were the equestrians, which were a cavalry unit, and they sat at the top. They promoted their people into the position of power. And then the middle class and the poor, they were more of the foot soldiers, and they could only afford so much armor. So that's why the Servian army was just based on more administrative and economics. And then their largest unit was a legion, and there was 60 centuries in a legion. So what happens here is another man comes along and reorganizes the army. This man was Marcus Furius Camillus. He is known as the second founder of Rome after Romulus. He was elected dictator 5 times, and he had 4 triumphs. Triumphs is like a ticket tape parade that you see in New York. Now, his first triumph wasn't accepted very well, but later on in Rome it became a very prestigious and great honor. I just want to show you too that 50% of these pictures I put up are mine. The other 50 are from the internet, because the internet has professional shots and stuff. They just look better. For example, this is the most famous square in Florence. It's the Piazza della Signoria, and this building here is the Palazzo del Bargello, and it houses a lot of paintings from the stories of Camillus, which is I'm going to be showing you. This is my shot of the Bargello here and here, and then you see this statue right here in the internet shot. Well, this is my shot of the statue, so you can see how my shots are just So next to the Bargello, where the black arrow is here, that's the Uffizi Gallery. So there's a lot of great paintings, Leonardo, Raphael, a lot of great famous paintings in here, but I'm just doing the Roman history stuff. And this is Hercules outside the Uffizi killing the Minotaur. That's me in front. This is the famous Ponte Vecchio Bridge over the Arno River. Great spot. That's me in front of it. So anyways, point is, I use internet shots because they just look better, and but just pointing out that I love to go visit these places. But anyways, let's get back to Marcus Furius Camillus. Now, Camillus was born in 446 BC, and he died in 365 BC. And when he was in command, when he took over, he not only showed his military genius, but his administrative skills as well. He set up laws that the new land that the Romans would conquer would be given to poor plebeians, and he also allowed many plebeians who would work on these lands to receive pay. And as a result of this, many plebeians who could not supply themselves for military service now would be able to. And then it kind of went hand in hand that the more lands they conquered, well, more men they received for military service. So that was some of his administrative work there. Now, he reorganized the Roman army. He got rid of the rigid phalanx system, and he created what historians call the triplex axis. And it's the manipular system that the Romans used. This allowed for far better flexibility on a tactical level than the phalanx allowed. Now, the legion as a whole consisted of 30 manifolds. The manifolds mean handful, which was the main tactical unit now. Each manifold could have anywhere from 60 to 120 men. The Hastates and the Praesian manifolds usually had 120 men, while the Triarii had about 60 men. Now these manifolds were arrayed into 3 lines of 10 manifolds each. So the first 2 ranks had 1,200 men because they had 120 men in each manifold, while the last line, which was the Triarii, would have 600 because they only had 60 men in each manifold. So in front of these 3 lines now were light infantry, which they called the veletae, and these attacked in swarm fashion. These were skirmishers. This is what took care of cavalry, chariots, elephants. They threw spears, javelins, slings, whatever they had. So the first rank of 1,200 Hastates were young men, rookies basically. The second rank of the 1,200 men of the precepts were young soldiers, but they were more experienced. And then the third rank of the 600 Triarii were the hardened veterans. Now, these units would deploy in 3 lines. The manifolds usually drew up in a checkerboard fashion with space between the ranks and file to allow the veletae to withdraw between them after they'd done their job and threw all their missiles. Now, as the Romans would advance toward the enemy, they would open their rank and file because this would allow them to throw their pilums. And then they closed quarters for the hand-to-hand combat. The manifolds could change direction easily while advancing. Now the largest unit was the legion. Still, that didn't really change. It was 3,000 to 4,000 men, with the tactical unit being the manifold now. Now there were 5 manifolds they always kept in reserve. Now centurions were in charge of each of these manifolds. You can still refer to them as sentries, but they were referred to as manifolds at this point. And you can have 2, 3 centurions in a manifold. One would be the main guy in charge. The other 2 would be subordinates in charge. Now let me point out that these changes that Camillus made to the army didn't take place till about after 390 BC. So I'm just pointing it out now. And then, of course, it takes time to put this into practice and drill and stuff. Anyways, now they usually, in a legion, had about 6 tribunes also that helped run more of the staff stuff and, logistics. Now, in charge of the legion was a legate, and that basically comprised your entire legion. Now, if there were 2 legions or more, then you would have a consul would lead it, and his second in command would be a praetor. So that's basically the gist of Camillus' legion and his formation. Now, before I continue with the Roman history, we have a new rule. It's rule number 3, divide and conquer. And the Romans really used this strategy throughout their history. Now, what was taking place here was the Hernici people resided between the Volsci and the Aqui, so the Romans made a pact with the Hernici to help them defeat the other 2 tribes. The Romans, the Latins, and the Hernici fought the Volsci and the Aqui for like 70 years. So Camillus was involved in some of this. And you got to understand, in military campaigns and wars, it involved a lot of marching, a lot of building camps, digging ditches, skirmishing, basically a lot of maneuvering. One side would try to outmaneuver the other until one side felt they had an advantage over their opponents, and then they would offer battle. There would be a lot of skirmishing and screening engagements. Then every once in a while you would have a major open field battle, which most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time would decide the fate of the war or an entire nation. And these major engagements are the ones reflected in my battle record. They will show how many major open field battles the Romans got into that were important, and how many they won and how many they lost. Now, besides the Romans having to fight the Volsci and the Aqui and the Sabines, now we're going to be back involved with the Etruscans. They've been dealing with the Etruscans for the whole time here, since they kicked them out. I didn't cover the Fabii family. You can look up like the Fabii Wars. The Fabii family took on the Etruscans from the city of Veii, and they fought this battle of Chimera. Not very important to me. The Etruscans tried to get back in Rome, back and forth. It just went back and forth, and nobody got the upper hand. But what's happening at this time, now that the Romans are winning more land, their army's becoming more experienced, they now get back involved with the city of Veii, and they start this siege on them. And after a while, Camillus has to take over. So the siege of Veii is an important battle because it ended the Etruscan power. Now, Etruscan power ended not only because of this, but the Celts were coming in from the Po Valley across the Alps. They settled in the Po, and we're going to talk about all that later, but they were already weakening the Etruscans also. But the struggle for supremacy in this Roman area that we've been looking at this whole time, and the Romans were prepared now to go to war with their old rivals at the city of Veii. Now, Camillus attacked two other cities that were allies to Veii. The siege was undertaken in 405 BC and it lasted to 396 BC. The siege was becoming very unpopular with the Roman people. Now, Camillus, he received the consular tribune powers, and after he already defeated the Florari and the Campania cities, they recalled him over to the siege to take over there, and they made him a dictator. And this was the first time they made him a dictator. And he took over the siege. Now remember, the war was in its 10th years, and he took over the final assault on the siege. And one of the first things he did was he paid the Roman soldiers to stay in the siege lines all year round, because campaigning season was from spring to September. In the wintertime, they just held a skeleton crew, and they would take turns on just watching the city. But other than that, back in spring would come, and then everybody would come back. He paid them to stay in the siege lines, and this led to the Romans' first professional army. And Livy records that Camillus started mining operations against the city. Now, these sections of the walls are just old ruins from the city of Veii. And then, in a determined assault in 396 BC, the Romans conquered the city. Now, this siege greatly enhanced Rome's prestige because they won this battle without the help from any of their Latin allies. So, Rome was on their way of becoming a major force. On a side note, I have a funny story here. I brought my brother-in-law on some battlefield sites, and I don't know what he was expecting to see, but he didn't find it very fascinating and quite boring just to look at ruins like this and some walls and bricks stacked up. There was nothing magnificent or, big old palaces or structures. I don't know what he was expecting, but I love this stuff. This is history. This is civilizations trying to survive back when Western civilization was rising. So I love it. Anyways, the Romans' battle record now improves to 5-1. Now, after this victory, Camillus has himself a parade, and Plutarch writes of this parade, and it was very gaudy, very haughty, very grandiose, and the Roman citizens regarded this to be, more done by a king or a god, and they were rather offended by it. But, this was the type of commander Camillus was, and because of the struggle of orders that were still going on, and he got in class struggles, he, had enemies of the state, and he was eventually exiled. However, in 394, they did make him consular tribune again, and he went and finished off Rome's last enemy of this war, which was the Furius. And at this point, the entire Italian peninsula, or at least the entire central peninsula, was so impressed by the Roman victories of Camillus, the Acqui, the Volsci, the city of Campania. They all proposed peace treaties to the Romans. They were none too happy to be their ally now. And you can see here on the map, Rome, after the Sabines, they controlled this area. They increased their size by 70%. Then look at the next shot here, the next color. After the Volsci, the Acqui, after winning that, they increased their area again. Now look at the purple. This is after winning the V and the Etruscan Wars here. They now control, or at least have domination over this entire. They are on their way to becoming the Rome as we know it.